Henry V, the warrior king who struck fear into France, has led his armies to victory after victory, from Agincourt to Meaux. But even this king cannot escape death. At just 35, Henry dies at Vincennes, leaving behind an infant son and a kingdom teetering on the edge of chaos. With the new King Henry VI too young to rule, the reins of power fall to others. Men who promise to guide the kingdom through crisis. But ambition, rivalry, and misfortune turn their stewardship into chaos. This is the story of the men who were supposed to protect England and how they failed. This is the story of the Lord Protectors of King Henry VI. It was never meant to be this way. When King Henry IV usurped the throne of Richard II in 1399, he had already established a fairly stable lineage. The son of the great John of Gaunt and grandson of King Edward III was surely in a position to leave a lasting legacy. Despite his son's relatively short reign, Henry left a lasting legacy with outstanding military successes in the Hundred Years' War against France. Yet, this Henry did not have the vast swathes of possible heirs his father had, although he did have a brother, Thomas, Duke of Clarence, had been heir to the throne in the event of his brother's death. But when he was brutally killed at the Battle of Beauge at the age of just 33, his brother now only had an infant son that could succeed him. Before the king died after just 9 years on the throne, he named his younger brother, John, the Duke of Bedford, as regent of France in the name of his son. And with no one in England to oversee the kingdom, a regency council was established under the leadership of Henry's only other remaining brother, Humphrey, the Duke of Gloucester. These brothers couldn't have been more different. Whilst both joined the Order of the Garter in 1400, their paths diverged sharply. Whilst Humphrey enjoyed an intellectual education at Oxford, his elder brother John trained for war, becoming Warden of the Eastern Marches of Scotland in 1403. Both served in government under their father, with John taking the lead in military affairs. In August 1416, he commanded the ships which defeated the French fleet at the mouth of the Seine. Humphrey, on the other hand, oversaw much diplomatic success, most notably welcoming the Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund of Luxembourg in 1416 and signing the Treaty of Canterbury, which served as a pivotal defensive and offensive alliance against France. So, despite their differences, when the call to serve their kingdom as co-rulers came, many expected smooth sailing. But this prediction set the stage for one of the most tumultuous periods of medieval English history. Confining himself to French affairs, John took up Henry V's work of conquest, seeking to strengthen his position through an alliance with Philip of Burgundy. However, this task was rendered impossible by the ambitions of his brother Humphrey, who had just married the Countess of Holland, a union which gave the English Duke a claim on the lands which Philip hoped to secure for himself. John sought to restore prosperity to the districts under his rule. He reformed the debased coinage, granted privileges to merchants and manufacturers, and removed various abuses. However, the ambition of his brother would not disappear, and on his return from the continent, he discovered that the Duke of Gloucester had clashed with the king's powerful advisor, the Bishop of Winchester, Henry Beaufort, and the council implored Bedford to come home to England to settle this dispute. John became chief counsellor, but failed to retain the Burgundian alliance, with Philip making peace with France in 1435, only a week after John's death at Rouen. In totality, these two brothers oversaw a period of roughly 15 years, and in that period, whilst John endeavoured to secure stability in France, his brother's persistent quarrelling with the Beaufort family and unpopular alliances had set the groundwork for a future claimant to the throne to realise their ambitions. Born in September 1411, Richard Plantagenet, the third Duke of York, was certainly already set to inherit a lot. It was through his mother, Anne Mortimer, a descendant of Edward III's second surviving son, that Richard inherited his strongest claim to the throne. By the middle of the 15th century, Richard Plantagenet had become the wealthiest and most powerful noble in England, with his power second only to the king. Following the death of the Duke of Bedford, Richard succeeded him as commander of the English forces in France. From 1443 to 1450, Richard remained largely out of sight. But when Normandy was lost in August 1450, and top royal ministers, including the Lord Treasurer, were murdered, an opening had emerged for Richard. He landed in Anglesey in September 1450 and gathered support on his march to London. Framing himself as a reformer, he attacked the Beauforts for losing France, in particular the Duke of Somerset, who was a close advisor to the crown. But despite all of his power and attempted pleading with the crown, he was forced into a humiliating oath of loyalty in March 1452 at St. Paul's Cathedral. By summer 1453, Richard Plantagenet looked powerless. However, following the fall of Gascony in July of that year, Henry VI fell into a state of mental collapse, unable to rule for a whole year. Whilst the council tried to carry on as usual, a Great Council was summoned in that October, and with the death of the English Chancellor John Kemp in 1454, it was impossible for government in Henry's name to continue. Richard Plantagenet, the man who had inherited so much, had just become the Lord Protector, and his brother-in-law, Richard Neville, the Earl of Salisbury, had become his Chancellor. However, to everyone's surprise, King Henry VI recovered only a year later and restored Somerset. In response, York and the Nevilles attacked at the First Battle of St. Albans in 1455, defeating the king's men, including Somerset. York dramatically entered Parliament in 1460 with the backing of the Irish and placed his hand upon the throne of England, expecting the Lords to acclaim him as king, as they had done for Henry IV in 1399. However, they didn't. The best Richard could achieve was the Act of Accord, by which Richard and his heirs were recognised as Henry's successors, and he and Warwick the Kingmaker became de facto rulers. Yet, with all of this power now vested into Richard, the Lancastrian forces were rallying in the north, and Plantagenet rode to face them. In December 1460, outnumbered, he was crushed at the infamous Battle of Wakefield. Only a few months later, though, York's eldest son became king, Edward IV, establishing the House of York on the throne of England. From Henry V's death in 1422 to the rise of Edward IV, England's history was shaped less by kings and more by the men who claimed to guard it. John of Bedford and Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, held the reins of power for 15 turbulent years, one in France, striving to maintain conquest and alliances, the other in England, navigating courts, marriages, and rivalries. Their efforts, though ambitious, were undone by faction, ambition, and misfortune. Richard Plantagenet, the Duke of York, inherited not just wealth and claim, but also a kingdom riddled with weakness and division. Even his military skill and political acumen could not fully restore order, and the cycle of protectorates, rebellions, and fragile truces carried England on the path towards civil war. Each protector believed that they could save the realm. Instead, their actions revealed the fragility of monarchy, exposed rivalries, and set the stage for national rebellion. All in all, the Lord Protectors did not protect England. They tore it apart, leaving a legacy of conflict that would shape the Kingdom of England for generations.